Hello, world. This is Nick Jackson, and welcome to your One Word Wednesday. I want you to know the best way I can describe our guest today is awesome. Let's go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for One Word Wednesday. It's an honor to have you. Just so you know, if you want to learn more about our mission, if you want to get involved, we have our website you can click on, and also you can buy our swag on our website. But if you want to join our Patreon, please do. We'd love to have more team members so we can love on more people. Hey, thanks you so much for being here. Back to the show. Hello, world. This is Nick Jackson, and I'm so excited about our guest today. He's like a neighborhood hero to me. Please tell the world who you are.
Hmm. Hey there, I am Daniel Hughes. I'm a pastor on the west side of Cincinnati, and we're in the same neighborhood. I also do community organizing, and I do coaching and consulting around the inner work of racial justice.
Mm. So today our word is detachment. All week we are talking about detachment. I want to know, how do you detach yourself from being a father to being a pastor to being a community organizer? Like how do you do that?
Wow. So let me ask this clarifying question because in my mind, there's a difference between non-attachment and detachment.
Mm.
So what I mean by that, um, detachment can be seen as or mistaken for a lack of love or compassion for someone or something.
Mm.
Um, Non-attachment, in my mind, is being able to be present to the people, the trauma, the chaos, the whatever's showing up without having to kind of take it personally, like without having to feel
Mm.
that I have to identify with that. So when you say detachment, do you think of that idea of that presence and mindfulness, or a total distancing or disinterest, distancing or disinterest in what's happening?
Man, that's a good question. Because when I think about detachment, I mean, I'm not stuck, right? So I can move from this side of the room to that side of the room. I got multiple hats that I wear, as you know, right? I can put on this hat and I'm not just attached to this one identity. I have these multiple identities.
Yes,
I can separate myself and still be me.
got you. Yeah. So, um, detachment for me, I mean, if I could be honest, detachment for me has always been my way of coping with stress and trauma.
Mm,
That that I grew up in environments where I was the only black person. My family was the only black person in an all-white community, and when stress and things occurred, sometimes around race, some of it is just being a student, being a kid in junior high. But I learned to totally detach myself as a way to protect myself, as to act as if I was disinterested in, as to act
mm,
like I didn't care. That was all a way of protecting myself.
mm.
And that had been the way that I had coped for a very long time, until I came across in the work of mindfulness, in the inner work of racial justice, is that for me to detach, I had to ignore or deny what was actually showing up in me. I had to
Mm,
deny or ignore what I was actually feeling. And so I learned to become non-attached, which
right.
was, I can, as you were saying, as you were describing, I can move in a room now. And if there's something that's harmful or hurtful and it triggers me, I don't have to be disinterested. I don't have to demonize those folk. I can simply just, I don't have to identify with that. I don't have to rely on their reaction to me. I don't have to rely on their affirmation, right? I don't need
Mm,
their approval. And so I can be in the moment. It could be chaotic, it could be confrontational, but because I work to own my own stuff, own my own,
yeah.
on somebody else. So for me, non-attachment is the way I would describe what you were saying, that I can move into all of these different settings
Mm,
and be my true and authentic self, no matter where I am, no matter who I'm with. I hold on to what Maya Angelou said. true freedom is when you know you belong no place, you belong every place, you belong no place at all. She says that the cost is high, but the reward is great. And when I learned that about belonging, it's like, oh,
Mm,
I belong here. Wherever it is, I belong there. If I'm
right.
there, I belong there. And so if people don't want me there, I still belong there.
Hmm.
And I don't need their, rejection or acceptance of me to define what I'm there to do or to experience.
Yeah, hold on. I gotta ask this question because in what you're talking about, especially being the only black person in an all white community, I just want you to know that white community was blessed to have you there, right? And I know in my situation, I've been on the same. I've been one of few. I've never been the
Mhm,
only. Now, when you
mhm.
see something on TV, or if you see something on the internet, like how do you detect? How do you separate yourself from the anger? Right. So I know it's easy to get caught up in the anger and fight the way that the dark side fights. Like, how do you keep your
Yeah.
idealism or your eyes on the prize and not get caught up in the little stuff?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I used to try to detach from anger, and now I don't. I embrace it because the
Mm,
anger was signifying to me that there was something that I wasn't okay with.
mm,
So I actually, growing up, I felt very comfortable with anger. I would never use it on anyone. I would always hold it in. I would bury it and bury it and bury
mm,
it until I couldn't bury it anymore and it would blow up.
right.
And when it would blow up, I'm like, I can't do that. And so I've learned that when anger shows up in me, it's my body telling me that there's something in the way of something I actually want. And when I started to
Mm,
learn that, oh, there's something I want here, I start to ask myself, okay, what is it that I want? And what is getting in the way of what I want? And so a lot of that anger is like a secondary emotion that's actually covering up something deeper. Does it make sense?
mm,
So when I see these
yeah.
images, I'm not as triggered as I used to be because I recognize one, this mediated image, they've got their own self-interest, right? They're trying to make money, they're trying to keep us, divided or whatever. They're trying to stir up anger, they're trying to stir these things up. But
Mm,
there are certain images that I see that calls that in me, and I start to do that internal investigation. Instead
mm,
of trying to say that they should stop showing those images, I'm asking myself, okay, what is this? What is this that's happening to me? What's showing up, and why is it there? um and that's been real helpful for me to, again, not be non-attached, right? Like, I don't need to escape. Detachment for me was,
mm,
it helped me to escape and avoid. Non-attachment allows me to stand in there and stand on my principles or stand on what I believe in, fight for what I want, work toward what I want. And there were a lot of things that I would detach, I would avoid, and there were a lot of things I left on the table that were mine. There were a lot of
mm.
things because I was detaching, I let somebody else have.
Right, right, man. That's so deep. So in your situation, right, especially when you're working with other people who are going through this trauma that they've come from, or the trauma that they've had, are you encouraging people to actually welcome the trauma, to lean into the trauma,
Mhm,
or especially when that trauma has anger as a symptom of it? That
mhm.
trauma has detachment. That trauma has frustration. That trauma has all of these ugly things that come with it, right? Are you encouraging them to lean into that?
Oh, of course, of course.
Mm,
I wanna get people to trust themselves. Trust your own body. God gave you your body. He put all the senses in you. He gave you everything you need to survive and thrive and live your best life. We've been trained that when certain things show up, if they're disruptive to what somebody else has going on, it's wrong, right? We've been told, like, you shouldn't feel that way. Well, okay, I
right.
I don't know if I should feel that way or not, but I feel this way. And so
Mm,
giving people the opportunity to lean into that emotional truth, if it's because it's gonna keep showing up. It's gonna keep showing up until you acknowledge that it's there,
right,
right? And
right.
so
Mm,
we've talked about that rain method. You got to recognize that it's there.
mm,
Recognize that something is showing up in you. It may not be showing up in anybody else. It matters to you. And then you acknowledge it.
mm,
Just, hey, this anger is here in me. I learned to trust anger after that. When anger would show up, I'm like, oh,
mm,
it's letting me know something is in my way. I'm trying to accomplish something. I can't accomplish it because something's in my way. So anger would show up. It's like, okay, I got to acknowledge it. Then
mm.
I investigate why it's there. And once I figure out why it's there, then I can sit there. I don't have to judge it. It's not ugly.
Right,
It's not bad.
right.
It's letting me know that something's getting in the way of what I actually want.
Mm,
And we've been taught, to deny what you actually want, and what you want is bad, especially as a person of color growing up in a white community,
Come
right?
on.
Like what you want is bad, and so you learn to say, okay, at least I did. Okay, so what do I want? What am I supposed to? Oh, I can do that. Okay, so
Mm,
as long as I did that and I could perform for you there, then I was quote unquote accepted.
right.
But it wasn't really, it wasn't really me. It wasn't really what I wanted. And so I do invite people to lean into those feelings, those thoughts, those sensations, those emotions, because God equipped you with everything you need to survive.
Mm,
Listen, if 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 your child puts his or her hand on a stove or is about to, the senses in that hand would say it's hot. Your body is already prepared. You
right.
trust it. You've learned to live, right? Like, oh, whoa,
Right.
that's too hot. But when it comes to our emotions, when it comes to our thoughts and our sensations, we're taught to ignore. Like, it's no, that's not right. And I don't
Mm,
I don't think that that's true. I think that God equipped you with everything you need to survive and thrive and live your best life. And so when those emotions are showing up, find people who you trust, where you can actually lean into them.
mm,
Because if you don't, it's going to come back.
yeah.
It's going to come back. Yeah.
Do me a favor, dig deeper into that. So when we're talking about detachment or non-attachment, let's focus on the non-attachment portion that you were talking about. Like you could
Hmm.
still be you and not be attached. But my issue is it seems like sometimes there's a fear that if we get into our anger, we're not going to be able to get out. Like
Yeah.
once I go to a place where I'm hurt, or I go to a place where there's trauma, or I'm going to a place where there's injustice, and I recognize that injustice, I'm now told that there's a way that I can let go. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? But I've been holding on to this anger for so long.
Yeah. 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 I again, I would say when you start, there are people. So for me, I'll use myself as an example. Um, because of detachment, I really only knew, had language for probably 3 or 4 emotions. I
Mm,
knew sad, I knew mad, and I knew afraid.
mm,
Right? Like those were really the 3 that I was very comfortable with. I wasn't even all that comfortable with joy. Like I didn't
mm.
trust joy. Cause right, it was like joy, happiness, like that's for somebody else. I'm just waiting for the next shoe to drop. Right. You know what I mean?
Right,
I gotta
right.
gird myself up for the fight.
Mm,
So anger was a way for me to, when things got really bad, it was a way for me to get that pressure up off of me. So I'm the kind of person who I learned to trust anger. And
mm,
like when somebody become nice and happy, I'm like, I don't know if I trust that. I don't trust that. I trust anger. And
mm,
so what I'm saying is the emotion, any of the whatever the emotion is, whatever the emotions are, um, it's showing up in you for a reason. And you've got to discover what the reason is. If I could use the Bible for an example, it talks about be angry but sin not.
right.
So, right. So the Bible will acknowledge that anger is a natural part of you, just like joy is a natural part of you, just like fear is a natural part of you. We just don't have really good examples of walking it out when it shows up.
Mm,
So we've seen people blow stuff up. We've seen people, excuse me, harm people, right? We've seen all this stuff and we're like, I don't have anything to do with that. I can't trust it because, it's just destructive. Anger can be destructive, but anger can also be, and I think of anger like this. I think anger is it's like the starter on your car. It can get you going, but it can't sustain you.
mm,
Anger can get you motivated, but you need love to sustain whatever got you motivated,
right.
right? Like you can't stay in anger because it'll burn you out. It's too intense. It'll deplete you.
Mm,
And so I think all the different emotions show up for you for reasons. Um, and again, I think that I think Jesus was a really good example of a person who used his emotions and he responded to what was in front of him. Most of the time, it was out of love. He wasn't doing a
yeah.
lot of stuff out of anger. It was love that was allowing him to do the things that he did with people.
Mm,
You did see him get angry when he saw an injustice happening to the collective,
right.
right? When there were people who were being kept away from being able to worship God. That he's like, that's really, really bad. It's inappropriate. But when he encountered individuals, man, that was compassion. And I would say that even that anger revealed his compassion for people who didn't have access to God, who were being who so
I got to come at you because I got one more. I got one more question, and then we're gonna close out. With that being said, I feel like there is a fear of other people's anger. I feel like that matter of fact, I've been taught to fear my own anger in fear that I'm going to do something that is going to be a foul, or I'm going to hurt somebody, or I'm going to get a penalty, or I might even go to jail. Right?
Yep.
Like when you're, and this is just an honest question. As you're talking, there's going to be people that are listening to this that are dealing with trauma. As you're
Hmm.
talking, there's going to be people that are living, like you said, as the only one in a community of people, right? And they're trying to accept things the way that they are and not get angry in fear, right? That their anger may be the end of their life. You understand what I'm saying?
Hmm. Hmm.
How do we push past that fear, right?
Yeah.
And accept the fact that we have an anger in the situation.
Yeah. So Richard Rohr uh, talks about trauma, and he says trauma that doesn't get transformed gets transmitted.
Mm.
So the current
Hold on,
situation that
say
we're in,
that again. What?
trauma that
Mm.
isn't transformed is transmitted.
Wow.
Okay.
Mm.
And so I'll give you an example. We know how tense it is in America right now. Black men, white women, black women, regardless of where you are, your class status, everyone can feel it that we're pretty divided right now. But if we go all the way back to when the Europeans were coming over, those Europeans were leaving trauma,
Yeah.
and they were trying to find a place where they didn't have to live under that trauma. But
Mm.
because the trauma wasn't transformed, they transmitted it through genocide of the Native Americans, of indigenous people. They transmitted their trauma in slavery, and then they transmitted the trauma in the racial system that said we got to keep these black bodies enslaved because they're inferior, because they're uh, sons of Satan, because they're like
Mm.
you start to create all of these lies and these false truths because you're trying to protect yourself from being traumatized from the trauma that you had in your past. And so
Right.
now you fast forward, all the isms and issues we're dealing with is that we got a bunch of folk that are afraid of dealing with our own trauma.
Mm.
They didn't have what we have today. They didn't have the science that we have today to deal with the trauma. They had weapons and they had diseases. You know what I mean? Like they had conquer. They were trying to get resources. And so I agree with you. And for people of color who have the legacy of slavery in their DNA and their bodies, our bodies were taught to comply and deny and avoid and ignore what
Come
was
on.
really showing up for you because you needed to survive one more day.
Yeah.
And so especially for people of color, there's this sense of I can't trust what I feel. Well, you can't trust what you feel, but you know, in this system that we have, this traumatic system, if you really showed up in your real self, there are consequences for that. And so I do think that there are people who are afraid. Some people are afraid of themselves. I would agree, but I think that the system is afraid. The system is so fragile because it's still built on trauma that it's afraid of anyone actually being their real selves because it could bring the whole thing down. And so we're
Mm.
sitting here trying to protect trauma. I think we're sitting here trying to protect trauma rather than transform it, rather
Right.
than yeah, yeah.
Man, that reminds me of, so when I was a kid, I used to watch Transformers and they look like cars, right? And that's all that they can be is cars. But then something would happen. There would be an issue, right? And the car would turn into something else. Sometimes different cars would come together and make a big thing, you know, and other times it'd be like a little beetle and the little beetle can transform. And it's the belief that it can transform. Like that's
Yes.
what I feel like we're missing. So I know I said last question before, but this is really the last question for everybody out there. How do we gain the belief and the hope that this thing can transform into something else?
Mm. I mean, I think that that is in that too is in our bodies. Like it's I mean, I don't know. To me, it's also in scripture. Like I see it, I see transformation in there. I see lives being transformed. So I think that
Mm,
they're historically you can see that in scripture. People are transformed, but I think it's in our bodies. Our bodies know how to adapt, and I don't know if the word evolve is problematic for some, but we know how to adapt and adjust to our realities, to our environments. And so constantly seeing things transform. Right now, we're in the winter season. Pretty soon we'll be in spring. We know transformation all the time. It is who we
Mm,
are. It is there. We just don't believe it in ourselves. We don't believe that we have the power to transform because there's a lot of stuff stacked up against us.
mm,
You've got the training in your mind. You've got the collective trauma from your ancestors that go back for, and this is everybody. This isn't about this is everybody has it's their downline, their ancestors experienced some kind of trauma that's locked into our bodies. And so right, we know this. And so you got that going on. And then you have these systems. You got systems that continue to re-traumatize folk,
mm,
right? You- and so even when we're trying to do the best we can as a people, you got to navigate a system that's going to re-traumatize you, right? The criminal justice system traumatizes, education, public education, like all these systems that are designed to help us, improve us, protect us, say they don't. Our
right.
politicians right now, we're all feeling traumatized by Washington. That's been the case for how long?
Mm,
So the church has traumatized people. That's supposed to be the place where people are supposed to find safety and security and right
mm,
God. So there's so much trauma. That's what I'm saying. There's so much trauma in our land, in our neighborhoods, that I think we believe it's impossible. But I would encourage the folks who are watching to look even within and say, remember a time when you actually transformed. A thought that you had, a belief that you held, that it actually shifted in you.
mm,
You saw something, you experienced something, and what you believed you knew, you no longer believed after you had that experience. It's in us. It's in you. And if you can't be transformed, then there's no hope for the rest of us. Like if I can't believe in my own transformation, then there's no way I can believe in my brother's transformation.
right.
I can't
Mm,
believe it. I could say it, I could use the words, but I won't actually believe it.
mm.
And so for me,
I,
my definition, oh, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead, go ahead.
I was gonna say my definition of faith is that things can be otherwise.
Mm,
That's faith for me, is that whatever I'm seeing, whatever I'm experiencing, I believe things can be otherwise. So if it's trauma, I believe things can be otherwise. And so
mm,
then my behaviors then line up with my beliefs.
right. And for me, if I was to answer the same question, right, my need more than anything else is for us to detach from it is what it is and lean
Mm,
into things could be otherwise. Like when you're saying they could be otherwise, I'm going to change otherwise, and I'm going to say better, right? Just
yeah,
better, right? It doesn't have to be a situation. We have to detach ourselves from that. I got to detach myself from that. It doesn't have to be a situation that it is what it is, so it is what it is. That right there is not fair, and we actually pass our when you said we transform our trauma, or what was it? We transfer our trauma unless we transform it. That's exactly what happens every day.
yeah. In that regard, I totally agree. There are some things you just got to walk away from. So detachment, as you were describing there, I think back on the children of Israel leaving Egypt. You've got to
Mm,
leave your prison. It starts there. You got to want to be free,
mm,
and you got to detach yourself from everything you think you know, everything you've been taught, everything that you believe. There is a total detachment from that reality. Like it is what it is. No, slavery is what it was. It is what it is. I'm not okay with that. I'm leaving the plantation. Deuces. I'm going to go on the Underground Railroad. I'm getting off of here somehow. You're right. That's
right.
exactly. That's right.
And
Yeah.
there's so much comfort sometimes in the hard times. Like there's a comfort that comes with staying on the plantation. There's a
Yes.
comfort that stays with having a broken system. There's a comfort that stays with being in a broken relationship. There's a comfort that stays with being in a bad work situation. Man, I gotta stop this. We can talk all night. Let me tell
Yeah.
you, yo, this is Nick Jackson and
Daniel Hughes.
hey Daniel, how can they get a hold of you?
You can reach out to me at pastordhughes@gmail.com. You can also look at me up on Facebook, Daniel Hughes. And that's the easiest way right there.
Y'all, it's been an honor to be here with you and Daniel. It's been an honor to be here with you. Please, please believe that things can get better. Have a great day.
Man.